So you just heard a nice conversation about Bitcoin on the balance sheet. You heard about corporate adoption of Bitcoin. Our talk's a little similar, but I'm going to start by showing why it's different than the ones you already heard. I don't want to repeat everything you already heard. You heard a lot about that stuff. I want to start with just an observation I had once. This panel is called Digital Gold, so let's just put that in perspective. I once looked at the Grand Canyon, and I said, you know what? Canyon is not really the word for this. There are canyons. This needs a whole nother word. And I think of the same when I think of digital gold and Bitcoin. It's so much more than just digital gold. It has these amazing attributes. So does my theory make sense? Do we need another title for this session? You know, digital gold, we get it, but what are the characteristics? Let's just start with that. What are the characteristics that make it a little different than just digital gold? Mark, I know you have an answer to this one, so...
Yeah, I would say, first of all, you know, what happens is that our brains are comparing mechanisms. So whenever we're introduced with something new, we don't understand what it is, and we try to compare it to something that we understand. So like with electricity, for example, like what is this electricity? Oh, it's sort of like a way to have a digital candle, right? And so we try to compare
digital
something.
Candle, I like that.
And of course it was way more than that, but we're trying to like figure it out. So we put Bitcoin into these boxes. Well, it's sort of like a new type of currency. Well, it's sort of like a way to store value. Well, it's sort of like a way to store data without being corrupted. And it is all those things, and it will become much more. So that's what I'd say first of all. But if we think about Bitcoin, and we have Bitcoin the network and Bitcoin the asset. So if we think about Bitcoin the network, it has certain attributes, and those are borderless, censorship resistant, immutable, right? It's portable, it's transparent, right? Things like that. And so when we think about gold, I would compare it more towards the monetary principles of gold. So those would be durable, right? It would be that it's scarce, right? It's that it's fungible. One piece of gold is one piece of gold. It's divisible. So those are sort of the attributes that made gold the premier medium of exchange and store of value in the world for 5,000 years. And Bitcoin certainly has all of those, plus better, it's like more portability. But then it has even way more attributes that make it even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lawrence, do you share my vision? Does it make sense?
Can I borrow this? Yeah, I agree. You know, I almost can't do better than that, but I would add that what it represents not just it's digital gold because it's a scarce asset, but more importantly, it's digital scarcity. It's an invention of digital scarcity, and it's built on top of the internet layer. And so, as Lynn so brilliantly points out in her book, it just changed everything because suddenly the biggest problem with gold was you couldn't verify it and you couldn't move it. And here you can move this, you can move enormous amounts in very, very short periods of time. And so it really is more than gold. It's a lot more than gold. But it does, as Mark says, you tend to, you know, it's a digital candle. Electricity is an electrical candle. I mean, you start off by saying, okay, the problem with money has always been that it's been diluted. You know, gold, the amount of gold on the planet is going to double in the next 50 years. And here we have a fixed source of something that's immutable, completely different. So yeah, but I have to say, when I try and orange pill people, I start with digital gold.
Of course, yeah, of course. It is that we're pattern recognition machines, right? We see patterns, and if you can draft behind a pattern, people will just advance. It's memetics, right? They'll understand
it does so
quicker.
much more, though. I mean, think of the way it eliminates war. Yeah. I mean, gold doesn't have a role in that per se. I mean, given what's happened, right?
Yeah. So you must have an interesting perspective on this as well.
I mean, tough to top what the gentleman here. I agree with everything they said. But, you know, if I take a step back, I would just kind of rephrase what they said in a different way. I think, to me, Bitcoin is dynamic and gold is static. Like, I think the first use case of gold is the clearest one that people can understand and resonate with, right? Which is store of value. Today, money in fiat sitting in a bank is depreciating. You're losing against inflation. Your assets can get confiscated justly or unjustly. So Bitcoin is just a more effective version of a store of value, which is gold. And some of the attributes, you know, were mentioned by Mark, but, you know, ultimately I think there are 5 criteria that make something a store of value. Number one, it's universality. I think in that one, gold has the lead, given that it's been around for thousands of years. But, you know, as we go along, we've hit that, like, escape velocity with Bitcoin that, you know, over time, and especially with newer generations coming in, they're going to easily substitute that notion of store of value from gold being antiquated and Bitcoin being the new successor, right? I mean, if you just think about it, there's about $40 trillion worth of generational wealth that will be passed down from, boomers to Gen Zs to millennials over the next 10, 15 years. So when they look to allocate to beat inflation and store value, they're going to look at Bitcoin. That's a natural evolution. The second is volatility. That's another area where I think gold has a bit of an edge, but Bitcoin is a new asset class, and new asset classes are going to obviously be a bit more volatile, but guess what? If you zoom out, over the last 10 years, Bitcoin has delivered 60% in terms of annual returns. So yes, there are lots of ups and downs, but this will smoothen out over time as institutional adoption streamlines volatility. And then the last point, I think, as he mentioned, it's, I think, more durable. It's more scarce. There's 21 million Bitcoins. There's, gold could be scarce physically, but you could always mine more. And lastly, it's just more portable. Not only is it divisible, but it's also more portable. I can carry all my net worth in my pocket. Can't do that with gold.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a bit about how it's similar. And I was just talking with Lawrence earlier. We're both New Englanders. And New England, of course, there was a time when we were called frugal. We were called low time preference people. We built tremendous institutions in New England. That's where all the great colleges come from America. But when I look at New England these days, I see the wreckage of fiat. And this is where the digital gold thing starts coming into our psychological worldview, where that's where Bitcoin and digital gold have this similarity where time preference really starts to change. And we can see that in our area. We've seen what's happened in New England to our ability to opt for the future and build for the future versus living for the moment on debt. So a little bit about that similarities.
Yeah, well, look, there's no doubt that New England has gone to shit.
Yeah, it's depressing.
But it's pretty much because fiat has done it. I mean, fiat, really all of America has somewhat gone to shit because we got centralized and the ledger got taken over by a central bank. And, it's a corrupt central bank, and we've got money that's based on credit. And, if all the debt were paid off, there'd be no money around. And so it's an incredibly flawed model that's, that we all know has destroyed the world as we know it. And so all the principles that were enacted in the Constitution, which made America once a great country, have kind of been trampled. And, just as simple as in the beginning of the Constitution, only gold and silver could be money. They were sound forms of money. Yeah. We watched, it took a couple hundred years, but now, we've got money that they grow the money supply 42% in 2 years. So, yeah, we all know this. It's just horrible what's going on. The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it is what Von Mises said. They can't stop it. And nature is healing. And we're gonna take all that away from them. They're all gonna be bankrupt. All these fiat lords are gonna go away. The system's gonna be fixed again as a result of Bitcoin, which is the absolute beauty of it. So it is much more than digital gold. It's actually a spiritual repair of our entire society, in my opinion.
I like that. And like what you were saying about the generations and the wealth transfer, right? You can conceivably see it as millennials and boomers and the money's going in one direction. I tend to see it in like fiat NPCs and Bitcoiners. You can't really just turn it into generations because we got older Bitcoiners, we got younger Bitcoiners, we got young people who don't know what's going on and that are spending all day trying to make a buck, not saving Bitcoin. So we can see this psychological change, this generational thing and this contrast in wealth transfer from the people who get it, from the people who don't get it to the people who get it. I think really is that part where we need a new word because something else is happening here. Something in our subconscious is changing.
Well, what we have going on is the difference of an infinite game versus a finite game. And fiat makes us think in terms of finite being that there's a defined time ending. Whereas that's fiat. But in the Bitcoin world, it's an infinite game. The goal is forever. And so when we think about generations, passing down wealth generations, younger generations, older generations, one, that's a finite frame, number one. Number two, that's a retail frame. Because now once we have sovereigns and institutions coming in, institutions and sovereigns play the infinite game. So now we have money going into trusts and family offices and entities, corporations that will be there forever. There is no more generations. Certainly with retail, my parents bought some, maybe they pass it to me, but that's a small piece that we're now past. We're moving into stage 2, as I'll make the case tomorrow, moving into the frenzy phase, and institutions and sovereigns will be holding Bitcoin forever, Laura, forever.
Forever, yeah. I love the forever, Laura, and in your case, you're based here in the kingdom, and that's what it is. It's a kingdom. And it's not a republic that's trying to live for today. as a kingdom, as a sovereign who runs this place, they're trying to think in those long-term ways. It's not about the money that's been produced, it's the long-term vision. And you've experienced that here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, look, as I was characterizing it, I think that was phase one, right? So that's essentially the store of value. But I think from there it moves to being sound money, right? And that touches every aspect of the financial system, right? Because as the gentleman mentioned, it is broken and Bitcoin is the fix. Digital assets is the fix. And so that power of, global financial inclusion in a world where 25% of people remain unbanked today, Bitcoin is the answer. Crypto is the answer. And so for us, I think in the Emirates and the Middle East, for us, it's important to diversify away from, hydrocarbon-based economies. And there's nothing better than to kind of jump onto a long-term, I would say, infinite trend as well, to kind of, get ahead of the curve. And for me, being a part of that was super exciting. I think, regulations came in to set the stage for that next phase of mass adoption where institutions, sovereign wealth funds, pensions, corporate treasuries can all begin to allocate into the space. So, it's great to see that foundation. And like you said, it's a part of a long-term strategic vision.
Yeah, and go ahead, Lawrence.
No, I would make another point. I mean, it's digital gold, and I think one thing that's important to remember is there weren't many gold bugs left. I mean, we pretty much all died off, and the sound money crowd had gotten down to a very small number of people left. What changed the world, what I think is going to probably be one of the most important books of the last 100 years was Saifedean's The Bitcoin Standard.
Yep.
Because as a gold bug wandering around, somewhere in the 2015, 2016, 2017 timeframe, I started encountering 20 and 30-year-olds coming up to me and quoting von Mises, and I was like, this is different.
Yeah.
And so, young people grok digital shit, and here we've got digital sound money. And I had a friend who was a big hardcore gold bug like me, and I used to be, and he came to me one day and he said, Larry, I'm selling all my gold. I'm going all the way into Bitcoin. I'll tell you the reason why I'm doing it. They figured out how to manipulate gold. Yep. We are never going to win. I'm going to join the villagers over there who have the pitchforks and the torches, and they're storming the castle. They're going to help us win, and that's what we got to do.
I think there's a very interesting flywheel that I see happening, right? So more participants come into the space, brings in more capital. More capital brings in more builders, because with Bitcoin, again, it's not just store of value. It's a whole system where you can have so many DeFi use cases built around it. That leads to more use cases. More use cases gives you back more participants, and that flywheel continues.
Yeah, let's move it, the way you even mentioned that. I want to move this into the whole concept of collateralizing Bitcoin to create let's call it the economic flexibility to start investing in a way that, I've often called what they did to the gold bugs, what they did to the bond vigilantes, what they did in 2008. They basically made Wall Street a porno. There was no real risk. It was just like, just jerking off. It's not real, pardon the vulgarity, but they made it not real. The people who wanted the real thing came to Bitcoin because you could make it and you could lose it. But that brought a whole new psychological mindset. And we see that with people taking these Bitcoin collateralized loans and using them to grow. Because if you miss the mark here, you can't just go get another loan from the unlimited loan machine. You got to actually focus those energies. If you're willing to basically short your Bitcoin to grow, attaching it to these vehicles, you got to get it right. So, Mark, is this a way to clean up the allocation of capital problem? That, to me, that's really where America is suffering. We have all this money. We could do, like we heard Bukele say recently, America can do anything. They have unlimited resources. We can build anything we want in America. Why is it that if I want to see a beautiful geodesic dome, a modern type architecture, I have to go to Singapore? Are they richer than America? I don't think so. Why can't we do that in America? What happened?
Yeah, that was a great point that he made. But ultimately what you're talking about is this misallocation of capital. So when you have no risk, no skin in the game, if you will, knowing that there's always a bailout there. And so I wrote a book called The Uncommunist Manifesto, and we talked about this specifically where Bitcoin reintroduces this risk, right, this skin in the game. And the reason why that's important, number one, is it does prevent a lot of this misallocation. And so ultimately we're supposed to have a world where solutions come to problems. So we find a problem. Someone comes up with a solution for that. We allocate capital to that, and we solve that, bring value to the world. But today, we have that all perverted where we have a bunch of money going around trying to chase a problem that doesn't maybe exist or need to be solved. So that's number one. Number two, we have this system where it benefits the bankers and the Cantillon effect, those closest to the money supply. And it allows those people to continue to gain power, and it starts to distort the market. And I'm all for the capitalist system, and I want to see billionaires and potentially trillionaires. But what happens in a Cantillon effect is you get these oligarchs, if you will, and it starts to distort the system. So then you have the Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post and distorting the way the news comes out, or even Elon Musk buying Twitter and changing that.
Excuse me, are you saying losing $100 million in newspapers is not a good idea?
Well, it should certainly have consequence. And ultimately what it does is we want a system, a capitalist system, that one, allows you to go from broke to a billionaire. But we also need that same system to push billionaires back down to being broke. And so we need the system to be able to go up and down. But the system that we have is you only go up. And once you get close enough to the money supply, you never come back down. And then there's no room at the top. And so, yes, this reintroduces risk, skin of the game, true consequence. It'll reintroduce the way that we think about allocating capital, which is a good thing for everybody, give us that long-term approach, and then ultimately just, change the way the world is built.
Yeah, and I'll bring it back to education for a second, too. Like, I want to continue on the collateralized piece because I find it very interesting, but go back to New England. I mean, those were the best schools on earth. They're now filled with the stupidest people. I would probably be hard-pressed to find dumber people than the Harvard campus at this point.
Yeah, I think that's true. Fiat ruins everything, right? I mean, just by definition.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is a very important, and something I feel very strongly about, is that this has been the century of war, and it was all founded by fiat. And if you look at all great wars, no sane group of people want to give up half of their income to go fight and kill other people on the other side of the world. They just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And yet the fiat model has allowed that to continue at greater and greater scale. And that's the best part of this whole thing, and that's why this thing is so much more than digital gold. It's a fix for a problem that the world has had for the past 100 years.
Yeah, Bitcoin to me made me reevaluate World War I to understand that this was gold-backed countries that didn't know how to finance war.
That's when it all started downhill. I mean, the Bell Epic was 1870 to 1914. We had deflation. We had incredible GDP growth. You had harmony, you had free trade. It was a wonderful period, and then World War I broke out.
Yeah.
And from then on, it's been chaos.
And that was the time where America figured out the greatest war flywheel finance machine the world has ever seen.
The Fed.
There's never been anything like it, right?
Yeah.
And we see that run around the world and create these failures of institutions.
And I mean, just to bring it up into today, I mean, we spent $8 trillion doing military stupid shit in this part of the world. I mean, for what? To protect some oil supply lines? I mean, it was just absurd. Yeah. And we all pay the price for it. If you consider the technological developments that we've undergone in the last, since Shockley did the microprocessor in the 50s and 60s, and all the technology we've had, it's made all our lives a lot better. But if we hadn't had all the fiat drag on that, we would all of our standards of living would be 50 to 100% higher.
Yeah.
Because we've all paid taxes equal to 50% of our output to fund stupid shit like $8 billion in war. It's been horrible. It's been absolutely horrible. But that's the beauty and the promise of this new quote-unquote digital gold.
And it's also important to highlight just how early we are. Like if you're talking about capital allocation, I mean the total wealth in the world today by Morgan Stanley, I was reading the article a week ago, it was around 500 trillion. Bitcoin is only 0.4% of that. Gold is at 4%. So we are so early. So all these issues that we're talking about, they are worrying, but we do appear to have a solution in place, and it's about time that things get going in the right direction.
And it looks like this, because it is a psychological shift, even within Bitcoin. I know one of the great advantages we have is the community cohesion amongst Bitcoiners, because we're able to spread information amongst us in a P2P manner, just like our network spreads forward, and we're able to have this global cohesion. I can easily picture a country that gets out of line like Canada did against the truckers a couple years ago, and now as Bitcoiners get richer, I mean, they can go take them on. They can go short the Canadian dollar and say, wait a minute here, you guys think you can go after a few little truckers? We can actually start influencing that just with degenerate Bitcoiners throwing coins into a thing and shorting it. We know now how to do that. We didn't know how to do that before.
Yeah, I mean, the notion of having sovereign control of your wealth, it's an extremely powerful thing. I mean, all of these armies this is the Jason Lowry thesis, all of these armies got built up to protect wealth. And with 12 words, I'm sovereign. right? And that's incredibly powerful. No government can tell me what to do because I can go to another country.
Yeah.
I think you hit on the head. I think the power of community is so important for perseverance. In a place where for us, like, we go through so much shit because we're disrupting the last frontier.
Yeah.
And there's so much inertia there, and there's so much resistance. So if we didn't have powerful communities come together at the grassroots level, we wouldn't be where we are here today.
Yeah.
And that's not just from a Bitcoiner's perspective and the Bitcoin maxi, even from Binance. Like, for us, our secret sauce, what makes us the largest exchange in the world, is the strength of our community.
Yeah.
And what we've endured and we've survived and thrived because of our community. So I think, us sticking together gets us to the point of where we are today.
Yeah.
I would also say that it's not a hypothetical, like maybe one day we can push back on the Canadian government in that example. I mean, just look at what happened with Trump. And look at what happened to RFK. And I mean, really, the Bitcoin and maybe the crypto community got together, really rallied behind both RFK, which then and Trump, kind of brought them together, maybe the superpower, if you will. And then even pushed to now getting Gensler to be removed of the SEC, bringing in a crypto-friendly, cryptos are now with David Sachs. And so that shows the power of the community that we just witnessed right now over the last 6 months. It's a powerful force.
I would even say that Bitcoiners had a huge influence in showing Americans that we don't actually even have elections, because Bitcoiners have understood the contrast between crypto and Bitcoin for a long time. Now, this isn't an anti-crypto thing, but engineering these systems are always a trade-off between making them convenient and easy. We've seen a lot of crypto applications go for that, and God bless them. We got to experiment. We don't know the answers. But Bitcoin has always favored credibility over convenience, and it's a trade-off. Engineering, if you think in an engineering sense, there's trade-offs. You don't get to ignore the trade-offs. This is not a hypothetical situation. You leave one to get the other. Bitcoin has optimized for credibility for a long time. And when the election thing happened, we don't know exactly what happened with our election systems, but we understood right away, and we were able to add that conversation in America. I think to all of our friends and colleagues just said, I don't know if the election is bad, but if you make it easy to vote, if you make it so simple and you don't ask for ID and you do all these things, how credible is it? These are trade-offs. And we were able to bring an entire worldview into American politics based on Bitcoin that we know intimately, and applied it without any information. We didn't need to know about elections. We just needed to know they chose and optimized for convenience over credibility, which gives you no credibility. So I'd say we had a big role in switching the dialogue in America that's produced an incredible results. Yeah, so now you can take that whole argument and talk about the community cohesion and the psychological fortitude that Bitcoiners have had, and you can apply it again to these conferences that we had. You said you had these young people coming up to you, 20 years old, understanding financial literacy. Now, Bitcoin is the greatest financial literacy tool ever created. We've wiped the universities clean in our ability to teach the people who come to these shows what finance really means. And this is one of our tremendous advantages. So I want you to talk, Lawrence, for a second about those kids you met and how much that inspired you to know that something was coming that was going to fix the psychological problems.
It inspired me a lot because I was in 2015 after gold had gone from 1900 to 1100, and I'd gotten wiped out almost. And it was a very rough time in my life. But the thing that's the beauty here is that this money problem has been with mankind for not just 10 years or 50 years or 100. It's been for millennia that we've been searching for perfect money. Do you know what I mean? Money has always been something that got diluted, and that in and of itself led to bad behavior on the part of human beings and fraud. And we now have a mathematically, digitally controlled form of money that cannot be diluted. And I mean, it's a really, really big deal. I mean, it's like the printing press. It's going to change absolutely everything, and the fraud in society is going to go down so substantially. So I'm just incredibly encouraged, by that, and it's so beautiful to see that it's really technology that's freed us. I mean, I'm writing a book. It's be out soon. It's technology that's freed us. I mean, we're going to a decentralized world. I mean, we hit peak centralization in World War II. We figured out how to kill 50 million people in 10 years. That was the end of it. I mean, centralization started with Henry Ford, and economies of scale made centralization made sense. Get bigger, get more powerful, do stuff more cheaper, bigger. But then we reached a point at which there was too much cost to it. And you get a madman who controls your country like Hitler, and suddenly you got millions of people getting killed. And thank God for the microprocessor. The microprocessor is going to save mankind. It really is. It started to save mankind, and we're now well down the slope, and it's going to get so much better because these big corrupt nation states are going to die, and all these bad actors are going to die, and everybody's going to be able to verify shit because we've got an ultimate truth machine. Bitcoin is the ultimate truth machine. It's fun. It's unbelievable.
That reminds me of the Bob Noyce, the founder of Intel. And Bob Noyce, of course, won a Nobel Prize for the original thing and then said, we got to make the silicon transistors. He didn't care about the space program that he was selling them to. He cared about the transistor radio and putting a microchip in people's pockets. And then he was the surrogate father to Steve Jobs because he knew Steve Jobs could get those microchips in a more powerful way into people's pockets. And then finally, we get to the Bitcoin angle where you actually do have the full power of the microchip now in your pocket because it's giving you this sovereignty that it didn't have before. So
I was going to say it's important kind of to continue on that with technology and what you're talking about with the microchip because we're talking about gold and we're talking about the attributes and the need for sound money for millennia and those types of things. But it's also important to understand that we have moved into the digital age. And so we've gone into an age where gold failed because we started having global trade, global commerce, and we started to speed up transaction times. It got easier to transact, to trade, but the settlement times didn't get any easier. And so now we've gotten to a point where we can have instantaneous transactions, but we're still using archaic settlement. Yeah. And so in the information age, we need information tools. And so now we have the ability, which gold couldn't do. So gold needed debt on top of it to have velocity. And so every time that we've tried this, and even some crypto projects have tried to use different ways to bring that velocity, but now Bitcoin is something that gives us both store value properties as well as the velocity to transact, which can give us now the full benefit of the microprocessor, which is instant transactions as well as instant settlement at the same time with the true bearer instrument. Yeah. And that's really mind-bending when you think about the implications of that moving forward.
Yeah, I think right now, Bitcoin is the largest decentralized compute network in the world. And the reason why I think it's still, lagging to become transactional is because it's not as fast as other blockchains, right? So right now what we see is Bitcoin is store of value, stable coins are transfer of value, right? So you want to move your asset, you switch it to stable coin and you can send it, it settles faster. But over time, I think as the network improves and the speed gets to a level and a scale to where it could become actually just instantaneously sound money and store of value.
Yeah, I'll be hosting the crypto versus Bitcoin debate with Justin Sun and Marty Bent shortly. But that reminds me of the velocity thing that you mentioned and what you're just talking there. That'll be one question I have for Marty is that crypto can be seen as the, let's call it the same way that debt was put on top of the dollar. It is this thing that can add velocity to experiments, basically.
Yeah, but earlier I mentioned that the way the world is supposed to work is we have a problem, and then we create a solution for the problem. So the problem in the world is, as have been highlighted many times, endless money printing, for example. That's a big problem. The centralized control of the money supply that allows that endless money printing and the distortions with war, et cetera. We have censorship as a massive problem. North Korea, Afghanistan, it's a big problem with censorship. Those are problems that need to be solved. The world didn't have a problem that needed faster money. That wasn't a problem. That solution doesn't do anything for us right now. Moving money faster than a wire transfer, like Bitcoin, is great, but ultimately we need a censorship-resistant, decentralized platform that nobody controls. That solves the world's problems, not a millisecond faster. That doesn't mean anything. And so that kind of takes me back to the point where we have all these experimentations, which are great, but we don't need that. We don't need faster money. And sure, stablecoins are faster, but they're not decentralized. So we're still moving on somebody else's ledger, centralized, controlled censorship ability, right? So one point I'd bring out, and we'll hear more on the other debate.
But Mark, there has to be a happy ground, right? I mean, like, it's not gonna replace everything overnight. There has to be a way where it integrates into the current system at some point, where it doesn't, overly disrupt everything, and we come back to square one.
Yeah. So all this brings up is the issue of how fast is Lightning going to get developed, and when will the medium of exchange piece of Bitcoin come into existence? And I was sitting with Jeff Booth earlier, and we were talking about this, and I said, it's pissing me off, Jeff. It's taking too long. Lightning's too slow. It doesn't always work. It can't send big stuff, etc. And he said, Larry, slow down a second. They invented the internet. ARPANET started in 1968. Berners-Lee didn't come along with HTTP until 1991. Okay, so they've had, it took them 20 years to build all the stacks and layers to get to the internet being what it is today. Bitcoin was founded in, 08. We're 16 years in. He said, don't worry. The next 5 years, and specifically 10 years in light, they're going to blow your socks off. And we're going to have, this is going to be an MOE device. It's not today, but it will become one.
The other thing I would add to that is, we talked about this yesterday, Nolan, is that when you look at monetary history, so you have to understand these things from multiple angles. And when you look at monetary history, you have to understand something that's called Gresham's Law. And Gresham's Law is that bad money drives out good. And so what that means is, like, up to 1965 in the United States, quarters and dimes were made of pure silver. You'll never find those in circulation today. Everyone's taken those out and they've saved them. If by some chance you got a pre-65 quarter or dime, that would be worth $4, you would not spend it. You would save it because fiat works way better. The bad money works good. And so right now, fiat works pretty dang good. And so what we want to do is save the good money, the Bitcoin. I believe the MOE, the medium of exchange, comes at a point where we need the Bitcoin to do something fiat can't do, which we'll get to. It's a whole other topic. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But I believe that's where the medium exchange comes. Otherwise, the bad money, the fiat, the Gresham's Law continues.
Bad money drives out good money, but good event coordinators drive out panels that are done. A nice round of applause for all my folks here. Thanks.
Is your company ready for the next evolution in financial strategy? Bitcoin for Corporations is your partner in securing the future of your business. With exclusive membership benefits, our comprehensive masterclass, and a network of trusted service providers, we provide the insights and resources to help you incorporate Bitcoin into your financial strategy, ensuring stability and long-term value. Strengthen your business. Innovate with confidence. Bitcoin for Corporations, protecting your treasury and positioning you for the future.